Hello, YouTube. It's DasGregor, and welcome to a Where Are They Now kind of episode. Last week I looked at Slackware 14.2, and then someone mentioned I ought to reevaluate, calculate Linux. So this week we are looking at Calculate Linux 15.17. I like to start my videos talking about what it was like installing the OS. And I'll be quite frank with you, although I am DOS, that I almost thought I was going to have to give a bad review. I thought I was going to have to say, "Ooh, dear me, I have suggested this as a desktop alternative to Gentoo for a while to get your feet wet, but something has gone terribly wrong." But I'm here to say instead, I found the problem, I fixed it, and I'm here to share with you the solution. When I went to install this, I first installed it in my VirtualBox on my Gentoo system because I wasn't done playing around with Slackware from last week. And I had no problems. It was very good. But then when I went to my hardware, which is an HP DV8T, which is slightly old with only 4 gigs of RAM, an NVIDIA video chipset in it, I was running into a lot of issues attempting to install Calculate. First off, the menu systems to install were difficult for me to be able to traverse. The menus that I was supposed to pop down, for instance, just setting the time zone, I couldn't seem to get those to work. It was as if the GUI was not proper. Another issue that I saw immediately was Cupzilla, which is the browser by default with her Calculate. Every time I would open it, it would immediately just crash on me. I thought, something just isn't right. And I was using a USB stick to install this, so I thought sometimes there is an issue when taking an ISO to a USB stick, so let's burn this to a DVD. I don't like burning things to DVDs because unless you have a DVD rewritable, you end up using it, burning it for a one-time use, two-time use, and then you don't have a use for it anymore. But as cheap as media thankfully is right now, it's not too big of an issue. I still prefer to use a USB stick when doing a lot of these installs. So I burned it to DVD, and I had the same exact issues. I then tried the Mate version of Calculate Linux to see if maybe it would be anything different. And it seemed like the graphics were slightly better, it seemed to work, but it was still failing with an issue installing the OS, which really befuddled me. I tried XFCE, and it actually laid down without any problems, but I really wanted to test out their version and setup of KDE for what I'm familiar with for you guys instead of using XFCE or even Mate. So I went back to doing some troubleshooting, and one thing I figured out was when I was booting up, there was an option for video settings, and it was setting and using the Nouveau drivers. I remember Caddy saying something about this in one of his reviews, that he had some real issues with the Nouveau drivers. So I also saw that there was an option for me to choose NVIDIA chipset. So I chose the NVIDIA chipset. It built the NVIDIA chipset, I believe, on the fly while it was booting, and suddenly all of my problems disappeared, melted away, and Calculate was the way I expected it to be. Wonderfully awesome. I was able to easily use the install tool, get everything up and running. Cupzilla even stopped crashing. It was a video issue evidently with that. So I was able to install KDE, and it is running Plasma 5, 5.5.5 I believe right now. There is the ability to upgrade using 5.7 metas that are in the repository. But I wanted to leave everything as vanilla as what you would experience trying this for the first time, straight from the media. As I said, most of the issues disappeared, but one thing kind of annoys me are disappearing toolbars. And if you'll notice down here, we've got this application bar, which is nothing more than a panel. Every time, and you'll have to pardon me on this, one of the first things I did do was an update of the system, because I always like to do as a test, will this break? Because I don't know how many times I've tried a distribution and it laid down great with its image, but as soon as you try to do an update, it's bread, it's broken, it's kaput, nein, kein gut. So I did the update, and I'll get to that in a moment. But after I did the update and rebooted, I said, I don't like the fact that that panel keeps auto disappearing. Some people might like that, but I wanted to make it so it was a static panel. So I'd right click on the desktop, I'd go to unlock widgets, and you see how you hear that sound and that pop that it says that now things are undone, and you got it? Well, instead of that, I'd get a big fat is broke. It broke. It no good. It just crashed. But the weird thing is, it would give me an error saying that KMix had crashed the system. No, why would KMix? And then all of a sudden, once I got it working, that ba-doom explains to me why it was crashing, because it was trying to play that little recording and blowing up. What I found was that by default, Calculate comes with GStreamer as the phone on backend. I've personally always used the VLC backend for a while now, so I decided to blow away the GStreamer backend on the system, point it to VLC backend on the phone on. Once I did that, and then also did a depth clean to get rid of the rest of the GStreamer version of the phone on backend, rebooted, I was able to unlock the desktop without a crash. I did make sure VLC was the backend. Another way that I could see that it was truly this is if I would go into Start and I'd go into here to the system settings and go to multimedia. As soon as I'd go into audio video and I'd see something like this, and I'd verify backend. Okay, right now you see phone on VLC, but before it was GStreamer. When GStreamer was loaded, and I'd go to here and I'd say test this, and I'd hit test, it would blow up too. Interesting, but sound was working elsewhere. But for some reason, when I do these certain things, it would blow up. It would not let me unlock the widgets. So that's one thing to think about if you do try this and you do find that you have that issue. You may want to look at changing the backend for phone onto the VLC backend instead. Another thing that I noticed that was a little different with Calculate, and it's been a while because I think the last time I did a review was back in the Calculate 13 days, and that is everything started to go simultaneously. I wasn't seeing the compiling, and I like to see compiling. I know it's kind of weird, but I like to see the code go across the screen. There is nothing more aggravating to me than seeing a installing application and nothing, and you're sitting there going, what's it doing? Is it just sitting there? Is it working? Is it calculating? Is it compiling? What's it doing? I need to know. Great minds need to know this. And so I did a little bit of research, and I found out, let me get into here, that this number of packages to build simultaneously, and this is something I've never really played with, even with Gentoo. So this might be something that you could even include in Gentoo, but that was commented out, so I went ahead and uncommented it so that the jobs right here, --jobs equals 1 was the default. I'm not quite sure, unfortunately, with Calculate where it's getting its jobs default from, but I set it here as 1, and suddenly it's like, oh, it's what I'm used to seeing. Now I know I read some stuff online that said, Oh, before this, it was something like 5 hours to compile, and once I set that multi-threading thing, it only took 3 hours. So if time is important to you, it might be nice to have it, but I like to see the status of where something is, and so I really kind of like that. I don't mind the time. I got the time. Another thing that I changed, because I like to tell you guys things like this, because it might matter to you if you're giving this a try, and that is I did change in here, added the use Qt5. The reason is because if you're going to use Plasma 5, you really want anything that can be compiled with Qt, which is mostly used inside of the KDE environment. You want it to be KDE 5 if you can, and so it's just a better thing to do. So I added that, and I did a recompile of the world, and there were only a few packages that actually it needed, and the rest of this I left blank. Now I also want you to notice too, normally you edit something and it's a make.conf type thing, and if we get out of here, for instance, you'll see that it's actually in the etc portage make.conf directory, and inside of here is custom. And it's something that's kind of new to me, because I know this is something that Gentoo's been going towards. Instead of having a generic make.conf, there's actually little bits and pieces that you can customize for use flags, for package handling, etc. Now Calculate uses the code custom for any custom configurations that you might want to look at. If we go back, for instance, into Portage, then we can see in package.use, we will have something very much similar, custom. I've also found that sometimes when I'm using custom use flags for, say, Cinnamon or a desktop environment, I can create Cinnamon and I can put all my use flags in there. And it's just a better way of organizing them. Another thing that I'd like to bring out is if we move over into this directory here, or this tab, if you do an eSelect profile list, you will notice that these first profiles are the same profiles that you would use within a generic vanilla Gentoo environment, and you'll notice that you don't normally see these down here, but you do have these profiles, and you'll notice that I am using distros CLD AMD64, which if you look at Calculate Linux's website for what these all stand for, you will find that CLD is their KDE environment live distribution, as well CLDM is the Mate, and CLDX is XFCE, etc. One neat thing that I have found about Calculate is they have a CLS, which is Calculate Linux Scratch. Now, Calculate Linux Scratch is a very basic image that you can install, and you can actually create your own distribution. There is documentation on their website, and if we go to their website, you can see a little bit of this information here. If we go to, I believe it's Calculate Linux Desktop, Calculate Scratch, for instance, here on their products, it talks about how you can create your own live CD or DVD with the applications that you want. There's documentation that explains how to build this, how to set it up, and you can create your own setup with the things that matter most to you. I think this is kind of neat. Now, I haven't played with it, but I still think it is pretty neat. Now, going back to what I kind of said at the beginning of my introduction, I have talked about how there are a lot of Gentoo users that are very afraid of installing Gentoo for the first time, or I should say Gentoo want to be, or they're thinking of getting their hands dirty with Gentoo. And I have pointed them in the past to Calculate. I stand by this. Calculate Linux, for all intents and purposes, is Gentoo, but it's a stage 4 tarball, which when you install Gentoo from scratch or from their instructions, you're going from a stage 3. Much better than when I first started with stage 1 tarballs way back when with Gentoo, and had to learn from pretty much the bootstrap up. But with a stage 4 tarball, it's taking an snapshot of the live CD and placing it on your hard drive. So what you see and what you're playing with in the LiveDVD is what you're going to get when you boot into your system. And that's a great way to get all of those scary install stuffs installed for yourself right up front. Now, there are, like I said, a few nuances and differences. A lot of Calculate, for instance, that I found was using binary packages that were pre-built. And then the things that you changed the use flags for needed to be compiled. This can all be changed by changing your profile to, say, for instance, instead of using distro CLD AMD 64, you could use AMD 64 13.0 desktop, and most likely, now I haven't tested this, but I'm pretty certain that that's going to start using then the Gentoo repositories only, which don't have pre-built packages unless you're pointing to a repo or download distribution that actually has a bin location. Most of the times I've created my own bin locations for packages that I might have to rebuild on occasion. I personally like to compile all the time though, because sometimes other things have been changed and you need to recompile so that it will build against new libraries, new dependencies, etc. You'll also notice that, hey, you're using Chromium instead of Quapzilla. I was curious how Calculate would deal with me wanting to use Chromium. Now, because I changed the use flag to use the codecs that Chrome has built in, their own binaries, because that has, I believe, if for instance, if we do an eQuery, for instance, and I think it is Chromium, I believe that's going to show us all the use flags for Chromium. You'll see that in here they have Widevine. Now, it's the unsupported closed source DRM. So if you're one of those, oh, I'm a Linux user, I use no closed source distribution type stuff, then you don't want to do this. But if you're one of those average users like myself that just likes to use Linux but still wants to have everything, you can use the Widevine option to get Netflix, Hulu, and other streaming and video on-demand services to work within Linux natively without having to do all kinds of funky, weird stuffs. It's pretty cool, but it also pulls down the Chrome binary and installs it, and it also means that it has to compile Chromium from source. Now, when I did that and installed about 11-12 packages, it was able to use the binary version because there was no change to the use flag configurations. And so those were like, boom, 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 you're good to go, man. And then it would get to Chromium, and I was like, okay, dude, you changed a few things. I'm going to have to download the source. Hang tight. It's going to be a while because Chromium's pretty darn big. It is. It really is. So after a couple hours, it finally completed, but I had a working version of Chromium. Everything runs well, and I got to use the best of both worlds. So in a way, it's pretty cool to use Calculate Linux if you want to get your feet wet with Gentoo. Get a little bit of that. I want to compile some things from source, but the other things that are like, yeah, what's it matter, man? It's just the file and it's no changes, so it's gonna work with a binary. So use it. It's gonna be fine. You know, sometimes you like to do everything, but sometimes that speed is nice to be able to get her done. Know what I mean? Anyway, I've had a really good experience with Calculate this week. Once I figured out the NVIDIA issues and the Nouveau issues. So a big warning there, if you mess around and you have Nouveau with an NVIDIA chipset and you're getting some weird funky stuff, go ahead and use the NVIDIA proprietary. It scared me after it finished installing the first time and it rebooted because it actually started rebuilding the NVIDIA binary again, because I hit F2 during that whole splash screen, because I personally don't care for splash screens. I like to know the nuts and bolts. What's it doing behind the scenes, man? And so I do the F2 and I'm watching it go through, and it gets down to building NVIDIA driver. Building NVIDIA driver. Building NVIDIA driver. Is it going to do this every time I reboot my machine? It rebuilt it. It added it. I did a few things and I rebooted again to see what it would do. And it was like, it's in. Oh, good. It was just a one-time thing. So don't get scared. It's normal. It's normal. So you can try everything you want. Easy to install once you know if there's a problem with Nouveau versus the NVIDIA, etc. Runs well. I did run into those weird quirks, of course, with the whole GStreamer being the phone-on backend versus VLC. I kind of almost want to start all over again and just see if it would work out of the box before I did the updates. But yeah, maybe I'll try it. I don't know. It's one of those things, though. Once you know at least what the problem is and you know what the fix is, you can repair it. All in all, this has been pretty cool. It's been pretty fun. It's kind of nice to get your feet wet with Gentoo without having to take that day, 6 hours or so, to get it all installed. Because with this, you can have a working Gentoo system in just a matter of 15 to 20 minutes, most likely, depending on how fast it takes you to respond to the install prompts. Oh, speaking of that, I tried to install it using my general partitioning scheme. And it was a little weird with that. And I ended up, since I always put it on a fresh hard drive, well, not a fresh hard drive, but I wiped the hard drive and used the entire hard drive anyway to see what it will do. And I went ahead and let it use its own partitioning scheme. And it did do some strange things with the partitioning that even I'm not too familiar with, because I'm usually just give it a root for the whole thing, give it a small swap space, which nowadays, if you get a lot of RAM, you don't even have to worry about that. But I don't do the create a home directory partition. I don't do the give it a small root partition, etc. I figure just give it one big partition. It sometimes is great to have home on a different partition, and there's a lot of different schools of thinking. What works best for you is best for you. Maybe not for everybody. But it's something to think about when you're doing the partitioning scheme, because it's a lot harder to go back and redo it. But the nice thing about this is, there's some things, for instance, on my main Gentoo system, I'm never going to change until I blow it up. And that's going to be a while. It's 3 years strong with this new laptop. Well, new laptop being 3 years. I have not destroyed Gentoo yet. And so there's some things I'll do differently when I rebuild it. But as for now, it is what it is, and I won't be changing it. But the nice thing about Calculate is, hey, it's almost like installing a bin distribution, but you still have all that power of Gentoo. It's awesome, guys. So, I still give this 2 thumbs up for trying Gentoo, but being able to get it in the quick, dirty, old-fashioned style. So enjoy it, try it, see what you think, and hopefully it'll work well for you to be able to kind of get your feet wet and try a few things. And yes, like I said, I still approve. So if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, I hope you enjoy it. Have a good one, guys. Bye.